Welcome to Books in 10. Remember, we're raffling an iPhone when we reach 10,000 subscribers. Like, subscribe, and journey with us into this book. Link to purchase the book in the pinned comments. Today we're taking a deep dive into The Catcher in the Rye, that iconic novel by J.D. Salinger. It's narrated by Holden Caulfield, this teenager who's just been expelled from yet another prep school and is wandering around New York City trying to figure things out. You know what always strikes me is how relevant this book still feels, even though it was published back in the 1950s. Have you ever felt that pressure to conform, that sense that everyone around you is playing a role? It's a big part of what Holden's grappling with.
Yeah, it really is. And it's fascinating how Salinger captures that feeling of alienation, that sense of being an outsider looking in, especially in the context of the post-World War II era. You have this societal push towards conformity, the rise of consumerism, and Holden is rebelling against all of it. He's searching for something authentic, something real, in a world that feels increasingly phony to him.
I've always wondered about Holden's obsession with phonies. It's like he uses that word to describe almost everyone he encounters. What's the deeper meaning there?
Well, I think Holden's use of the word phony is more than just teenage angst. It's a critique of the hypocrisy and superficiality he sees in the adult world. Um,
Hmm.
he's sensitive to people putting on airs, pretending to be something they're not. And it really bothers him. Think about the historical context. The 1950s were all about keeping up appearances, fitting into this idealized image of American life. And Holden's rejection of that is a form of rebellion, a yearning for something genuine in a world that feels increasingly artificial.
That makes sense. And his voice, the way he tells the story, it's so unique. It really pulls you into his head.
Absolutely. Salinger's use of stream of consciousness narration is brilliant. It allows us to experience the world through Holden's eyes, to feel his raw emotions, his confusion, his anger. It's a technique that was also used by modernist writers like James Joyce and Virginia Woolf. But Salinger adapts it to capture the voice of a teenager perfectly.
Yeah, one of the things that always stuck with me is Holden's expulsion from Pensy Prep. It's not just that he's failing his classes. It's that he can't stand the environment, the people. He sees them all as phonies.
Right. His time at Pensy really highlights this theme of alienation. He feels trapped, surrounded by people he can't connect with, and it ultimately leads to him running away. His expulsion is less about academic failure and more about his inability to conform to the social norms and expectations of that environment. It's a rejection of the system, a rebellion against the pressure to be someone he's not.
And then he ends up wandering around New York City,
Yeah.
hoping to find something real, something authentic. But it seems like he just keeps encountering more phonies. His date with Sally Hayes is a perfect example of that.
Oh, yeah. That date is so pivotal because it shows Holder's desperation for a genuine connection. He tries to express this deep longing to escape with Sally, to run away from all the phoniness, but it comes off as impulsive and even a little crazy. He can't articulate his feelings in a way that she understands, and it just reinforces his sense of isolation.
It's almost like he's sabotaging his own attempts at connection because he's so afraid of being hurt or disappointed.
Yeah, I think that's a really insightful observation. Holden's cynicism and judgment act as a defense mechanism. He pushes people away before they can get too close, before they can see his vulnerability.
And speaking of vulnerability, we have to talk about Jane Gallagher. She's this idealized figure in Holden's memory, representing everything he's searching for: innocence, authenticity, a genuine connection.
Right, and what's so interesting about Jane is that we never actually meet her in the present. She exists solely in Holden's memories, which makes her this almost mythical figure. His recollections of her, like the way she kept her kings in the back row during checkers, reveal a depth of feeling that he doesn't show towards anyone else.
It's like she represents this lost innocence, a time before Holden became so disillusioned with the world.
Exactly. She's a symbol of everything he's trying to hold on to, everything he fears losing as he enters adulthood. And this leads us to one of the most iconic symbols in the book, Holden's desire to be the catcher in the rye.
That whole image of children running through a field of rye and Holden catching them before they fall off a cliff, it's always stayed with me. I remember feeling so much empathy for Holden in that moment.
Right. And Holden's longing for authenticity connects directly to this powerful symbol. That rye field represents childhood, that carefree innocence he's desperately trying to preserve. And the cliff symbolizes the fall into adulthood, the loss of that innocence. His desire to be the catcher is a yearning to protect himself and others from the pain and disillusionment he associates with growing up.
And the fact that he misremembers the line from the Robert Burns poem, changing meat to catch, it emphasizes that sense of urgency, that feeling that he needs to actively intervene to save these children, and perhaps himself.
from falling. It's such a poignant detail. It shows how deeply Holden feels this responsibility, this need to shield innocence from the harsh realities of the world. It really is. And that desire to protect innocence is so intertwined with Holden's own emotional state. Throughout the book, we see him unraveling, struggling to cope with his feelings of alienation and grief.
Yeah, his grief over his younger brother Allie's death is such a powerful undercurrent in the novel. I'm curious how that loss shapes his view of the world and his interactions with others.
Well, Allie's death is a profound trauma that haunts Holden throughout the story. You know, it's a loss of innocence on a deeply personal level, and it colors his perception of everything. He sees the world as this fragile, fleeting place, and he's terrified of losing anyone else he cares about.
That explains why he's so drawn to children. They represent a purity and innocence that he's lost and desperately wants to preserve. That heartbreaking scene in the park where he's searching for the ducks in the freezing cold and drops Phoebe's record. It's like a visual representation of his own fragility.
Absolutely. The ducks, a symbol of resilience in the natural world, offer Holden a sense of solace and continuity. When he drops Phoebe's record, it's symbolic of his own shattered hopes and dreams, his inability to hold on to the things that matter most to him.
And then he makes that impulsive decision to sneak back home and see Phoebe. That scene with Phoebe is so powerful. She's the only one who seems to truly see him, who accepts him for who he is, flaws and all.
Right. Phoebe is a catalyst for Holden's emotional release. She challenges his cynicism, calls out his phoniness, and forces him to confront his own vulnerabilities. She represents the hope and innocence that he's clinging to, even if he doesn't always realize it.
I remember that conversation they have about what Holden wants to be when he grows up. And he tells her about his fantasy of being the catcher in the rye. It's such a poignant moment, because you can sense his desperation to protect innocence, not just Phoebe's, but everyone's.
It's as if he's projecting his own fears and anxieties onto the children in his imaginary rye field. He wants to shield them from the pain and disillusionment he's experiencing, but deep down he knows he can't.
But even though he runs away again, that scene with Phoebe feels like a turning point. It's as if he's starting to let go of that need to control everything, to protect everyone.
Yeah, their bond represents a glimmer of hope in Holden's otherwise bleak outlook. Phoebe's love and acceptance offer him a glimpse of the genuine connection he craves, even if he doesn't fully grasp its significance at the time.
And then he ends up at Mr. Antolini's apartment, seeking guidance and support. But things take a rather unsettling turn.
Holden's encounter with Mr. Antolini is complex and open to interpretation. Mr. Antolini is concerned about Holden. He sees his potential, but he also warns him about a terrible, terrible fall, a descent into despair and disillusionment. His actions, patting Holden's head while he sleeps, are certainly unsettling and add another layer of complexity to Holden's already fragile emotional state.
It's as if Holden can't even trust the adults who are trying to help him. It reinforces that sense of alienation and distrust he has towards the world.
And this leads to his final breakdown, that moment of utter despair in the museum, where he sees that "fuck you" scrawled on the wall. It's as if the world is mocking his idealism, his yearning for something pure and good.
That graffiti becomes a symbol of the phoniness he sees everywhere, a reminder that innocence is constantly under threat. But then there's that final scene with Phoebe on the carousel, and it feels like a shift in perspective.
The carousel scene is crucial because it suggests a glimmer of hope. Phoebe, riding around and around, represents the cyclical nature of life, the ups and downs we all experience. Holden, observing rather than participating, seems to be acknowledging that he can't control everything, that he has to let go.
That line he says about kids grabbing for the gold ring and how you have to let them do it even if they fall, it's heartbreaking but also insightful. It's as if he's finally accepting the complexities of life, the inevitability of loss and disappointment.
It's a subtle but significant moment of growth for Holden. He's realizing that shielding innocence doesn't mean preventing children from experiencing life with all its joys and sorrows.
And the carousel itself, with its bright lights and cheerful music, contrasts sharply with the darkness and despair Holden has been feeling. It's a reminder that beauty and joy still exist in the world, even amidst the phoniness.
The carousel becomes a symbol of hope, a reminder that life goes on even when things are difficult. And Holden's willingness to let Phoebe ride, to let go of his need to control, suggests a newfound acceptance of that reality.
Yeah, it really is. And it's interesting how Salinger uses these simple objects like the ducks in the park and the carousel to convey such complex emotions and themes. It adds this layer of depth to the story, allowing us to connect with Holden on a symbolic level.
Absolutely. The novel is rich with symbolism, inviting the reader to interpret these images and their significance within the context of Holden's journey. It's part of what makes The Catcher in the Rye such an enduring and thought-provoking work of literature.
So where do you think Holden goes from here? The book ends rather abruptly, leaving his future somewhat ambiguous.
Well, I think the ambiguity is intentional on Salinger's part. He doesn't offer any easy answers or neat resolutions. We're left to wonder if Holden's experiences have truly changed him, if he's found a way to reconcile his idealism with the realities of the world.
It's like Salinger is inviting us to continue the conversation, to grapple with these questions of alienation, authenticity, and the challenges of growing up.
Exactly, and that's the beauty of great literature. It sparks these ongoing dialogues, prompting us to reflect on our own experiences and search for meaning in our own lives.
For me, The Catcher in the Rye is a reminder that even in the midst of despair and disillusionment, there's always the possibility for growth and connection. Holden's journey, as messy and frustrating as it is, ultimately offers a glimmer of hope.
And it encourages us to embrace our own vulnerabilities, to challenge the phoniness we encounter, and to search for those genuine moments of connection that make life meaningful.
What strikes me is how relevant this book still feels today. We might not be living in the 1950s, but those pressures to conform, to fit in, to present a certain image to the world are just as prevalent now as they were then.
Oh, you're absolutely right. The Catcher in the Rye speaks to this universal human experience of feeling like an outsider, of searching for authenticity in a world that often feels artificial and superficial. It's a story that continues to resonate with readers of all ages, reminding us that it's okay to question the rules, to challenge the status quo, and to strive for something real.
Well, this deep dive has certainly given me a lot to think about. Thank you for sharing your insights and expertise.
It's been my pleasure. The Catcher in the Rye is a book that never fails to spark engaging and thought-provoking conversations.
And to our listeners, we leave you with this. What does authenticity mean to you? How do you navigate the pressures of conformity in your own life? And have you ever felt like a catcher in the rye, trying to protect yourself or others from the harsh realities of the world? Keep those questions in mind as you continue your own journeys. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find your own moments of genuine connection and meaning along the way. And remember, like and subscribe for a chance to win that iPhone. See you next time for another deep dive into a classic piece of literature